I'm Daniel Hartz, and this is the Sustainability Champions podcast, where we highlight the people, ideas, and innovations that are protecting and healing the planet. My guest today is Harriet Lamb, CEO of Ashden, a nonprofit based in London that accelerates transformative climate solutions and builds a more just world. They award people and organizations from around the world to show how sustainable energy can transform lives. I'm really looking forward to learning all about this. Thank you so much for joining me, Harriet.
Oh, Daniel, it's great to be with you on the Sustainability Champions podcast.
Well, thank you very much. So today I'd love to talk about three things primarily. Number one is Ashden's role in reversing climate change. Number two, a few of the amazing companies that you've seen and some of the trends as far as the sustainability space. And then, of course, your background, including your work both at Ashden and as CEO of Fair Trade International, which I think is also a very interesting organization. So first and foremost, can you give a little bit of background? What exactly does Ashden do?
So at Ashden, we run a series of awards. And in fact, the big unveiling of the winners of this year's awards is on Thursday, 2nd of July. So please book your place. It's an online ceremony this year for the first time. So we identify who are the real leaders in different sectors. For example, this year we've got an award for energy for people in refugee camps, or we've got an award for Indigenous people finding nature-based solutions to climate change. So each year we have a series of awards. We scour the world to find the leaders, the pioneers. People are doing really interesting and breaking new ground, not necessarily technologically. It could also be in the way they work, the way they're working to reach the most marginalized people. And we put the spotlight on them to share their amazing and always inspiring stories of what they've achieved, often against the odds, in order to really catalyze wider change, for people to back them, that particular project or program, but also for others to steal with pride their ideas, because we believe we have all the solutions we need to climate change in spades. What we need to do is get behind them, take them to scale, or replicate them globally.
Wonderful. I can really relate to that, because as I said at the very first sentence I said is Sustainability Champions highlights the people, ideas, and innovations that are protecting and healing the planet. And that's the little motto that I've come up for what I'm doing. And it sounds so similar to what you just said. So
that's why we were so thrilled when we found your podcast.
Wonderful.
Fellow travelers.
Yeah, how fantastic. So I'd love to know, and you kind of mentioned it, but and there's so many other questions to ask here. So why is this work of highlighting or putting a spotlight, as you said, why is it so important to moving the sustainability agenda forward?
Well, we've got 10 years left to fix it, all the science shows. At the most, we've got 10 years to take the kind of radical, dramatic action we need to take to stop the climate crisis's worst impacts. And in those 10 years, sometimes, individuals, you and me, can feel really overwhelmed by the scale of the crisis. We think, oh my Lord, what on earth can I do? And it's the same sometimes for policymakers. So if you take in Britain, for example, 70% of all local authorities have declared a climate emergency. And then they look at each other and say, now what do we do? And they need a climate action plan. If you think there's an emergency, you need to develop the plan. And so both for us as individuals, or for policymakers, or for local government or national government, what we need to do is say the solutions are there. Look at the myriad of solutions that are out there and get behind them and back them. So to give you one example, we then developed a toolkit for local authorities on how could they develop their action plans to tackle the climate emergency, looking at what's best practice in transport, what's happening in transport, who's doing really interesting work. And then we'd say, oh, here's an Ashden winner that, for example, helped communities in Birmingham who don't normally get on bicycles. It helped them have access to bicycles, learn how to cycle, and that actually enabled them to get access to new jobs because they were able to travel more easily.
Interesting.
Or to take another example, we would say, oh, if you want to really tackle, for example, energy in your local authority? Oh, here's Repowering, an amazing community energy group based in Brixton, who are really working on estates, on marginalised estates, to help them put solar panels on their roof, but also to help the young people get trained in the skills of the future of solar energy. So it's taking those examples of people doing incredible work, in this example, putting it into a toolkit, which helps local sustainability officers in local authorities who have no resources. It helps, gives them the framing and the way to develop their climate action plan. So that's just one example of some of the work we've been doing here in Britain, which honestly, our cities toolkit, which is on our website, I mean, it's just been flying off the shelves.
Amazing.
Because people are hungry for these kind of absolutely practical, concrete examples. What the latest fashionable phrase is shovel ready. These are ideas, they're ready to go.
Yeah.
They actually need more central government backing. And that's why we're also calling on central government as they think of how do we come out of the COVID crisis, what is the way out, where should they be investing their funds? We would say they should be investing in these well-proven techniques that can help us have a green recovery and build back better, so that we're both rebooting the economy, but not in the old stale way of the past, but in a way that also addresses climate change and generates jobs for people, ensures there's cleaner air because you've got fewer cars, or warmer homes because you've dealt with the housing problems.
What it sounds like to me is that you're basically doing the hard work of discovering the solutions and then saying, we found all of these potential ways of dealing with all these different problems, because there are so many problems as well as many, many solutions. And then do you speak with the government? Is that a big part of what Ashden does in terms of saying, like, you mentioned housing issues. So here are, 10 or 15 different solutions from across the world that you, for instance, the UK government can actually implement today. And that's the shovel ready that you're talking about.
Exactly. So where we've worked most closely until now has been with local government and local authorities.
Okay.
And actually, we believe they need more support and more finance. Their finances over the past few decades have been decimated. But they're the people who are closest to their populations, they're closest to their economies.
True. And
we think the economic solutions lie not in mega projects necessarily, but actually in investing, in giving the resources to local authorities to invest in their areas, because they know best where are the areas of greatest deprivation and need, and how best to reach the most marginalised. So to give you one example, Britain has a real problem of old, cold housing. We have to invest in what's called retrofitting, which means making those old, cold homes warmer and fit for living in. And that actually helps residents have lower fuel bills, and it helps lower their carbon footprint. And so there's a brilliant organisation called Energy Sprong. They're an Ashden winner last year, who retrofit social housing. They say it's a bit like putting a tea cosy on a house, but on a row of houses, on social housing. And so there's an amazing example which local authorities could call them into their area to say, can you help us retrofit our social housing in our area? And meanwhile, we're also calling on central government to put in the right place the right policies and the right investments to enable that kind of local action to take place.
Amazing. And so was this company, did you say it's called Energy Sprong?
Energy Sprong, it's a Dutch company originally, where they've done very well, and then they've launched in Britain more recently, and again proving incredibly successful.
Fantastic. So Energy Sprong, is that, just to understand where Ashden's role is here. So Ashden found Energy Sprong. You gave them an award for being one of these sustainable companies, and because of that, the government, then the UK local authorities, discovered Energy Sprong through your magnification and by spotlighting them.
Well, I don't want to overplay our part. In every case, it's different as well. Of course, Energy Sprong was already doing a great job.
Yeah.
And they're obviously the organisations whom we award. They're the ones doing the really hard graft work of finding the innovation, making sure it works technologically and from a business perspective. But exactly, we want to put the spotlight on them so that they can either scale up or be replicated. And obviously the impact that we have as an award really varies, because some organisations are much bigger, are more established, and others are much smaller, much more under the radar, less well known. And for some of them, obviously, being recognised by Ashden, it's a bit like a stamp of approval if they then go to donors, or the spotlight might actually really mean that they get noticed and backed by whether it's finance or whether it's local authorities. So it does vary, I have to say, and obviously it's a wonderful family, and we all work together to support each other. And above all else, it is different people in the Ashden family talking to each other is often the most effective way. It's that peer-to-peer learning is often the best way for best practice to spread.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really, really good point. So interestingly enough, I think you've mentioned so far a couple of companies in the UK, Energy Sprong based in the Netherlands. Ashden doesn't only focus on European companies and organizations. You're very global. How do you find all of these companies that you award? You mentioned that you scour the planet, and I love that word. So how does the scouring work?
Well, do you know what? Above all else, Daniel, it's talking to people. And I love talking, so that's good. It's talking to people about it, and people hear it. And I hope if anyone hears this program and thinks, well, I know this most amazing company doing this really interesting work, then please get in touch, because so often this is how it works. Obviously, working away on the computer, you can do a lot of research on the computer, and obviously it's talking to people who know people who know people, and the word spreads. So really it's all different ways that people come to us and that they hear about Ashden, or that we hear about them. So as I say, please do go to our website, which is www.ashden.org, and have a look. And if you know anyone who you think would be interested, please put them in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just to be perfectly clear, it's anywhere in the world in terms of.
So as you said, in fact, Ashden started really to put the spotlight 20 years ago on the problem that there are too many people in the world still do not have access to electricity. And so when Ashden started it, it was about really saying we've got to put the spotlight on the problem of access to energy for the poorest people who are the most left behind. And from then it has grown and become this coveted award. And we've also expanded to take on not only the global side of the picture, but also the UK. And we're also always looking at what are the new and most important areas. And that's why, for example, last year we launched a new award on cooling. Now, mainly in Britain, our biggest problem is around heating, but hey, over the past few days, we've had our own very hot, unusually hot temperatures here in Britain. Obviously, it's part of global warming. And so we've had a few scorchers, and when you have those scorchers, it can remind you that actually in many parts of the world, people then whack on the air conditioning. And air conditioning, of course, adds to global warming. So the hotter the climate gets, the more people are using air conditioning, which itself causes more global warming. It's an absolute vicious circle we're trapped in. So we're part of a big coalition that said we have to put the spotlight on the need to find new solutions to cooling, to helping cities cool down. So a really fantastic winner last year was the city of Medellin in Colombia, which some of you may know about Medellin because of the film Escobar, or the series all about Pablo Escobar. And Medellin was once most famous for being the home of the drunks gangs and having the highest murder rates in the world. And despite having all those issues to deal with, the mayor of Medellin is a very visionary person who said, we have got to tackle the rising temperatures in Medellin. And the way they went about it was by taking all the back alleys and the rubbish dumps, the places where actually the drugs gangs would hang about, where it wasn't safe to go. And they've taken them and they've trained up people from the marginalized areas in how to plant trees and bushes and flowers. They plant thousands of shrubs and greenery, and they've created the green corridors that you can now cycle around the city. They've created these places that what was once a rubbish dump is now a children's playground where the mums hang around and can chat to each other. And they've brought down the temperature by over 1 degree in many of those places.
Wow.
And so it's a really wonderful example of what Medellin have done with all the issues stacked against them. If Medellin could do it, I always think, hey guys, come on, can't more of us do that in some of our cities, to have green corridors and the better place to live, as well as bringing down the temperature.
Yeah, I think it's a very clever solution, and indeed, cooling down cities is a really interesting, I think, a really interesting kind of topic to explore, because you're absolutely right. I mean, if it's 31 degrees in London, and that's tough.
Imagine.
What about in cities where 31 is a cool day?
I mean, we have some of the cities we've been talking to for this year's award, cities like Ahmedabad in India. I mean, they've seen temperatures going over 40, over 45, over 50. I mean, they hit 50 degrees in Delhi last year. I mean, it's unthinkable. And of course, it's dangerous. People die of heat strokes when the temperatures get that high, especially the poorest people who have no choice but are outside in those kind of temperatures. Obviously, the better off people can always retreat into cooler homes, but the poorest people are the most vulnerable, and that's why it's so important that action is taken actually to protect people. So Ahmedabad has a whole heat action plan where they issue warnings, they reach out to people, they have water points, they're painting the roofs white, all kinds of initiatives to try to cool the city down and to protect the most vulnerable when the temperatures do skyrocket.
Yeah, I think what's going back to the way Medellin is doing it, and I'm sure Ahmedabad is doing it in a similar way as well in terms of planting trees. It's a really clever way of doing it, because it's first of all, you're creating a lot of shade that way, which obviously helps a lot, and you're also, by doing that, you're sequestering carbon because of all the trees. And
absolutely, and you're making it a nicer place to live.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
more
that's what all the
beautiful.
residents of Medellin said. They said, "Oh my God, it's so lovely. The birds and the bees have come back,
Exactly.
and it's a lovely place. It's lovely to walk from here to here because you're walking along a green corridor as opposed to a dusty, dirty, grey concrete.
Yeah,
So what's not to like? And that
exactly.
we've just got to sort of pile in behind these nature-based solutions. And interestingly, some of the people who, of course, know best about working with nature are, of course, the indigenous communities around the world, who are very often the most hit by climate change, have the least resources to deal with it, have done the least to cause it, but actually often also have traditional answers in how we can improve the situation. So one of our finalists this year in the Ashden Awards is a network in Brazil of indigenous people who collect seeds, and then they're selling them to local farmers to plant, to reforest some of the land that's been degraded. So historically, there's been clashes between the indigenous people protecting the forest, the farmers cutting down trees and planting crops to sort of more cash crops. And this is a brilliant way, by actually using the indigenous people's traditional way of scattering seeds. It's a very ancient technique where you don't have seedlings and rear them and plant them. You scatter the seeds, and actually it's far more efficient, far more effective. And critically, in this way, the indigenous people and the farmers are coming together, and that's also helping then lower the tension in the area while also reforesting the area.
Yeah,
so it's another great solution.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. And just one more thing which I realized is you can also plant fruit trees. And I think in Seattle it was I read that what they're doing is they're planting fruit trees in the parks around the city so that people can eat the fruits. And
it's so lovely, isn't it? And I think there is a whole movement growing of people saying, urban gardening, urban vegetable growing, planting more trees, and as a way, as you say, both also to get food to people on very low incomes. And one great example, I mentioned repowering, who put solar panels onto housing estates, and that was how they started. And then they realize once the panels are up on the top of a high-rise block, no one sees them. And so half the work about raising awareness is gone.
Right.
And they started to think about what are other ways to engage people? What's the next step? And they realized that, of course, lack of access to good, healthy food is one of the biggest problems on those estates. They're often food deserts. And so they found, though, there's often pockets of land lying derelict, and in particular in London, along railway lines, there's lots of waste land. And so they set up this incredible scheme called Energy Gardens, where local communities on the estates get to grow nutritious fruit and vegetables on this wasteland. They're powered by solar energy, they're growing good food, they're getting better food to eat, but it's also a great skill to learn and an activity. And they're such a great group. They've then gone on from doing that. They started growing hops in these little energy gardens. And from the hops, they're making energy garden ale, which is just a fantastic craft beer. And I really recommend you should look out for it. The only watch out is you have to put it in the fridge, because otherwise it's just a little bit fizzy. But I think that encapsulates the group, because they're just so full of energy. It's kind of bursting out. So look out for Energy Garden Ale.
Fantastic. Yeah, I definitely want to try Energy Garden Ale. And moving over to something a little bit different, I know that you're very passionate about education and schools, and that's a very important part of the work that you do. So, can you tell me a little bit about the schools campaign that you're working on?
Absolutely. And I think we've all seen how young people have been absolutely critical to changing the debate, Britain and globally. It's been young people, it's been the school strikers who've gone out there and said, you're messing up our future. That I think has had the most powerful impact on policymakers of any campaigning for years. And we've actually always worked at Ashden, we've always worked with schools. We started doing an award scheme for schools to sort of find the greenest school in the land. And from then we went on to supporting schools to help them reduce their carbon footprint. And through our scheme, actually, schools in the first year can very often reduce their carbon footprint by 14%. And critically for schools, they can save 12% on their energy bills.
Wow.
Because schools are so hard strapped for cash that's often a very strong driver. And so we've helped over 500 schools reduce their carbon footprint. But we just felt this is too incremental, too slow. We're facing a crisis. We've got to pick up the pace. So we're just about to launch, with hopefully back to school in September, a new campaign calling on all Britain's schools to reach zero carbon by 2030.
Wow.
So it's wildly ambitious. Our idea is each school says, yes, we commit to play our part to reach zero carbon. And that would be across a number of areas where schools have a carbon footprint. So the first one would be looking at their food that they buy. And they might like to have meat-free Mondays, or finding different ways to reduce the carbon footprint of the food. Then looking at how are the kids getting to school? Are they walking and cycling, or are they driving all the time? Tackling that. It's looking at the curriculum and what are the children learning in school. And of course, it's looking at the buildings and the energy that they're using. So the school says, we commit to play our part. We've already done these things, now we're going to do these things. And we call upon you, government, to give us the financial resources we need to get to zero carbon. Because most schools have no money. They can barely buy pencils, let alone contemplate replacing that old boiler, or putting up double glazing, or putting up solar panels. And so what we're calling on is both schools playing their part, but government backing them. We've got here a commitment to be zero carbon as a country by 2050. And we think what better place to start than schools, where young people have got the energy, they want to do something, they've been protesting. Here's a very concrete, positive action they can take back to their schools. And it's a great way to sort of spread the message throughout society, because every day, 10 million people walk through the school gate in the UK. Children and staff. And then behind them are all the parents and the governors and the suppliers. So it's a great way to have a ripple effect to help Britain reach zero carbon. And we've got to do it earlier than the legislation demands. So our campaign kicks off in September. We really hope you'll get in touch, anyone who's interested to join. And already, way before we've even started here, we've got people from other parts of the world saying, hey, this sounds cool, we want to get involved and have a similar campaign here. So I think it's going to fly.
That's so cool. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, starting with schools is a really interesting place to begin, because I've heard over and over again, just just anecdotally, how parents say that they make changes to their habits at home because their children are bringing things up, like, the kids learn something at school about recycling, and they say, we're not doing it correctly, or did you know this, that, and the other, and parents start making shifts. So if there is a way, you mentioned that, changing the curriculum, or at least incorporating these kind of things into the curriculum, it's so powerful, and the ripple effect, I think, can be very broad and very wide.
I completely agree, Daniel. We always talk about pester power. When people think, well, the kids have pushed me to do something negative, but I think actually pester power works brilliantly in also pushing positive change. And we know, for example, when schools do trial closing off the road so that you have to walk or cycle, or you can't drive, that people often say, the kids come home and say, no, Mum, we shouldn't, we shouldn't be driving to school anymore, or turn off the engine, don't leave it idling, that's bad for the environment. And they can be such fantastic champions, because they cut through all the blah blah excuses we give ourselves, and they just go straight to the point of, if the planet's on fire, we better put it out.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's fantastic. And also, if they just say it with such kind of, like you said, cutting through everything, and there's almost this naivety in terms of how it's very simple. And indeed, sometimes it is very simple. It's just the story that we tell ourselves that makes it complicated.
It's the complete authenticity. I think you're right, that it's not, oh, here we go, usual suspects, environmental charity says, kind of. And people slightly discount it, when it's these young people are just saying it because they really, really, really strongly believe it. And I think that's their power, isn't it, in having helped shift the debates. And now it's our responsibility as adults to help shift the policies, the practices, the actions that we're all taking to live up to what they're asking of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And from the wide variety of projects that you see, I suppose the first thing I'm curious to know about is, let's say you've been told about several projects, you've done your discovery, and now it's time to present the awards and actually find the finalists. And as you mentioned, the awards are coming up on Thursday the 2nd here. So how do you actually judge the projects? I imagine you have these just stacks of either applications or just companies, and you're thinking, okay, we need to pick the finalists. So what's the process there like?
Well, the truth is, of course, it's a complete nightmare, because there are so many amazing organisations who deserve to win, and you think, oh, can't you more than one winner? So we're always struggling with it. But how we do it, first off, we have a process right up front to make sure that people who won't get through don't waste their time. So we do webinars, we talk people through, we help people feel that they know they've got a chance. And then we have a panel of judges who come together, and they would be experts in the area. So, for example, with our new award on energy in refugee camps, we had somebody who was a community activist who was himself a refugee in London. We had someone in a refugee camp in Kenya. We had some people working in a policy arena on refugee policy, on energy access to refugees, in an area they'd worked on for 20 years. So we had a mix of academic and lived experience on the panel of judges. We then, people submit their applications, the team do a first shifting and present the sort of top 6 or 10 or so to the judges, who then narrow it down. And then we get it down to about 2 in the end, who we go and visit and do, well, normally we go and visit, apart from in a COVID-19 year, but normally we would have people who go and visit and see what they're doing, interview people, get the facts and the figures. And then we have someone who's got an eagle eye for finance, looking over all the finance. And then we bring it together and present the two finalists to the judges. And sometimes they submit videos, or we talk to them direct via video. And the judges have the nightmare of going round to find which one in the end is going to win the award.
Wow, it's a very involved process.
It is. It's a rigorous process, and that's why it's a coveted award. It's because you have to have really been through the mill. Not that it's, we hope it's not too much hard work, but it's rigorous.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to overburden people, because obviously only a small percentage are going to win. So you don't want it to be too heavy, but you want it to have rigor, so that we can stand by anyone who's won an Ashden Award, and they can be very proud of it and use it as a badge of approval when they are talking to others who they want to influence.
Yeah, I think that's I think it is important. You're absolutely right to make it rigorous for going both ways. Like you said, it really does. You need to feel confident that, you know, we are actually awarding a company that we believe in, and we can stand behind our decision. And also then the company that does indeed win the award at the end, they can say, we went through this. It wasn't easy, and we got there in the end, and they can actually be proud of it. And it's something
exactly, and I hope they do, and I hope they then enjoy being part of the Ashden family, where again they can swap tips and learn from other people who've won an Ashden Award, and find out how they helped use that to propel them forward to the next stage.
Yeah. As far as some of these, we've talked about cooling cities and schools. What are some of the other kind of, on a broad level, some of the trends that you're seeing as far as companies that are coming out right now to work on these, on some of the issues that we're facing today?
Well, I think one of the really interesting trends is about looking at really much more decentralized, democratized energy solutions.
Interesting.
So going back, for example, to our award for energy access in refugee camps, one of the finalists this year is an amazing organization in Yemen. I mean, honestly, that country has been through such terrible internal conflict, and so many people are displaced internally and have their lives torn apart. And in that situation, they not only don't have energy, they also have no livelihoods. And so it's actually a United Nations program that came together to help use access to energy as a way to also create jobs. And so they trained, in one case, a group of women, which is actually very unusual in energy in Yemen, but it's very unusual globally, to be honest. They trained a group of women to come together and set up a community energy group where they have some solar panels, which they're then selling the energy to the community. So the community has access to energy, clean energy, for the first time, and the women are able to earn a livelihood by selling the energy. It's a win-win. And that would be one example of the kind of decentralized approaches that people are taking. To give you another example from our shortlist this year is Solshare in Bangladesh, who've come up with a really brilliant solution to the problem of very decentralized energy, which is often you have a solar panel, I have a solar panel, and we're often generating more than we need, but you often can't sell into the grid because you don't have that kind of connection. The whole point of these often what's called last mile distribution of energy is these are people way out, perhaps on islands, up in mountains, in very hard to reach areas where the grid hasn't reached yet. But through Solshare's idea, they got a little sort of box, if you like, and if I've got solar panels and I've got more energy than I need, I can sell it to you, because maybe you can't afford even to have a solar panel, but you can afford to buy energy from me bit by bit when you need it. And then I sell to the local shop, and then we form a little network or community, and then if we've got extra, we can sell to the next door village and into their network. So it's this real idea of a decentralized people's grid of energy, which I definitely think is one of the solutions of the future. And another one at the opposite end of the scale, but linked, is people looking at real systemic shifts. So how do we get it so we don't rely only on the decentralized, but we actually get that up to a national level? And one of the shortlisted organizations there is the government of Togo. Togo faces, many huge sections of the population don't have access to energy, and they've set themselves an ambitious plan that includes a really clever combination of what some villages will put on the grid as normal. Others we're going to encourage to have these village level solar energy plants, and for others it might be down to the home level. But they've used this quite unusual mix at a national level, so really taking to scale the idea of decentralized energy, if that makes sense. Centralized and decentralized.
Yeah.
But really inspiring. So I think you do, because you need both all the time. You need these small people-run, people-owned solutions that are therefore much more democratic, but at the same time you need them at scale. So you always need that central government push.
I think that's really cool. It's very, in some ways, I think it's very enlightened or kind of humble of a central government to say, you know, we don't have the solutions or currently the wherewithal to be able to provide certain parts of our population with, in this case, energy. So what we want to do is help those communities to be independent. And that way that's what it sounds like to me, is that they're supporting sort of their independence. And in many ways, I think that that's probably actually a much more productive approach, because those communities that are, you know, whether they're marginalized or just far away from the grid, they get the support and they're actually happier, and they think, wow, the government actually believes in the work that we're doing as kind of individuals and as communities that are not necessarily connected.
I think you're absolutely right. And there's two other very progressive things about what they've done in Togo. One is they've said up front, we've got to subsidize this.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a direct subsidies to every family. It's sort of allocated a subsidy that then goes to the energy initiative. And that's actually very groundbreaking, because you and me benefit from the grid. The grid is subsidized. Our governments pay to put up the grid that brings electricity to our houses. So it's always, it turns out, the wealthier you are, the less you pay for things. Whereas very often poor people whom the grid doesn't reach end up having to pay for all their energy. But in this case, the government of Togo said, okay, we'll give you a subsidy so you can buy it from private providers, from co-ops, from NGOs. The other great thing they did, they said 40% of all the engineers on this project have to be women. That's fantastic.
Wow.
Because energy is a very male-dominated world. And yet it's often women who are the biggest users of energy, who are doing all the work in the home, helping the children do their homework, perhaps cooking. So they're the ones who most actually know about the kind of energy they need. And actually to say we want 40% of all the engineers to be women, I thought it was really great.
That's so cool. That's you're absolutely right. It's very progressive. I'd like to just, I'm conscious of time, so I'd like to go a little bit back in time and talk about your background a little bit, because you originally started, or one of your major places where you began was Fair Trade International. And I think that Fair Trade is such an important organization. Obviously, the work Ashden is doing as well is very important to highlight. I think Fair Trade, that's a sticker that we've seen on so many different products. Briefly, what is Fair Trade International?
Well, if you buy your bananas, your tea, your coffee with that cheery little green and blue stamp saying Fair Trade, then you know that it's come from organised smallholder farmers or plantations where the workers are able to organise, and that they've been paid a fair price that covers what it costs to grow the crops, and with a premium on top of it, about 10%, that they can invest in their communities as they like. Could be in improving their coffee co-op, enabling them to go higher up the value chain, washing their coffee or roasting it themselves, or improving the productivity of their trees. Or it could be they decide to invest that in helping more young girls go to university, or in building a health centre, or in building roads so they can get to market. So or it's up to them. That's their premium. And so at the heart of Fair Trade is basically about making sure that farmers and workers in the developing world get a better deal. Because at the minute, our food is far too cheap. And tragically, far too many farmers and workers don't get a fair price. And that's what Fair Trade seeks to change.
Yeah, I think that's a really important mission. As far as I think Fair Trade is seen most clearly on bananas, because it's just so easy to see against the yellow. Is the role of or is the goal of the organization rather for all food to have the sticker?
In the end, that would of course be the solution. I think we always felt that what we were trying to do in fair trade is create that little bubble in mainstream trade that showed that you can do trade differently, that you can put people and the planet first, because fair trade also has environmental standards, that you can put people and the planet first and still succeed commercially. So we wanted to prove the model in order to make a difference here and now, today, tomorrow, to currently about 1.5 million smallholder farmers and workers around the world, and at the same time have a bigger impact in shifting the whole of company agendas and the whole of government agendas on how they regulate trade. So we've made some phenomenal progress. Fair trade went from being an idea that people laughed at, that they said it would never work, then they admitted it might work as a tiny niche just for a few ultra greenies, to really becoming a part of the way we can go shopping, so that if you go into Waitrose, all the bananas are fair trade. So it becomes the norm, but a very special norm. Where we haven't made as much progress, honestly, is in shifting the whole of trade. That it is absolutely shocking if you see the poverty that cocoa farmers, for example, in West Africa live in. And so that it's half exhilarating and inspirational fair trade, because really totally driven by you and me asking for fair trade products from shops, from brands, and then buying them when we saw them. It's that campaigning, but also that shopping power, using our power as consumers has driven it. And it's frustrating because still the world of trade is so dominated by a ruthless focus on profit, price, and short-term returns to shareholders, who always seem to be more important than the farmers and workers on whom companies depend. So everything's still to play for.
Yeah, it sounds like there is a lot of work, and I can see the vein here of how it influences the work that you're currently doing. And I completely agree with you. I think, putting people and planet first is actually not it doesn't come necessarily at the cost of profits or at the cost of how the business actually runs and functions and whether or not it's successful. And that's a big part of actually what I speak about on this podcast, is the ability for so many different companies and people and organizations that are profit driven they are sustainable, and sometimes actually being sustainable makes them more profitable because you're finding clever ways to reduce certain things, use less energy, or like you said, start powering by your electricity through solar and then selling off the remainder, and you're increasing your profits while reducing your costs. And I don't think sustainability and treating the planet and the people first has to come at all at the cost of business or profits.
I couldn't agree more. And actually, it has to be if it's going to succeed in the long term. It absolutely has to be. And I think that was where companies, if you like, were amazed at the beginning, that they found actually, wow, this actually just really works also from a commercial point of view, that more people will buy my products. They also then feel good about the brand, and that's good for me as a whole. And therefore, I will sell more. And another key driver for companies is that actually they began to wake up to the fact that if they don't pay the farmers and workers a fair price, they're not going to go on growing cocoa. I mean, if you're the son of a cocoa farmer and you look at the unbelievable hard work for poverty wages, you think, forget that for a laugh, I'm off to the city to try my luck there to see if I can get a better job and a better income in the city. And so many companies began to realize that there would not be cocoa farmers unless they began to pay them a fair price. And not only that, of course, any farmer is going to give their best product to their best customer. So the higher the price you're paying, the more you're getting good quality products, as well as assuring its long-term future. So it makes sense for companies, fair trade, from a supply chain perspective. It makes sense because consumers have said absolutely clearly that's what they want, and they're ready to put their money where their mouth is. And it often also works for companies from a staff morale point of view. The people want to feel proud of who they work for. We all do. And so if you know that your company has committed to go 100% fair trade, then people feel really proud of that. And they feel that they want to work for a company that is really doing the right thing. And then when they go out and tell their friends who they work for, they go, oh, wow, I hear you're doing great things on fair trade. It's a company like Ben & Jerry's, where everything that can be fair trade in Ben & Jerry's is. And so people love that. They feel proud of that level of 100% commitment. But let's face it, we've also got a lot of laggards of companies that aren't treating their farmers and workers fairly. And that's why it's so important, I believe, that consumers keep up the pressure and keep changing that atmosphere within which companies operate.
Absolutely. And I think that ties back into another really key component of, at least from the point of view of this podcast, sustainability champions. I always think that sustainability champions are, as I said at the beginning, people, ideas, and innovations, because I think the individual does indeed have a lot of power. It's every time I buy a chocolate bar, for instance, I can make a decision that actually does affect the way other companies function and work and what they do, because I'm voting with my wallet, and that's how change is
I
made.
think that's absolutely so right. And I think we all underestimate our power.
Yeah.
And working at Fairtrade, as we tried to build it up, I was privileged enough to, if you like, be behind the scenes. And I can tell you the pressure, how successfully it works on companies, because often companies would say, my inbox is groaning, I'm getting emails, I'm getting letters from people asking me to offer fair trade, and I really don't want to, but my customers are annoying me so much. Tell me more about how it works. And actually, going back to our earlier conversation about young people, I also remember the CEO of quite a big company. It was hanging in the balance. Would they do fair trade? Wouldn't they do fair trade? And what tip was his children coming home and saying, oh, we've been learning about fair trade, and are you doing it at work, Daddy? And why don't you? And you should. And he very honestly came in and said that in the end was what tipped it, because if he thought that's what the future generation wants, as a canny company, we'd better meet the demands of our future customers.
There you go. I think that perfectly highlights how powerful just one or two children can be, and how powerful one or two people can be. And yeah, I mean, going back to Ashden, I think this ties in very well, because the companies that you're highlighting and the organizations that you're awarding, they're also they may be starting small, and as the demand grows for these kind of things, they will grow. And hopefully the idea there is that the idea spreads and other companies start picking up on it and improving it, and then it becomes the new norm.
Absolutely. And I do think we're seeing a shift in business. I absolutely think the attitudes of business toward climate change have shifted in some ways faster than governments have, because they're seeing it every day. And actually, it's also about how it connects for me personally. How I first heard about climate change was through the fair trade farmers. Right. Telling me that how difficult it had become to grow coffee. And it was a farmer in Tanzania showing me around his plot and just saying, do you know, it's become a nightmare, coffee growing. We used to always do what our forefathers did, what our parents did. And they said, now it's sunny when it should be raining, it's raining when it should be sunny. Then people get more and more natural disasters, and we started hearing more and more from people in Uganda. There's been a mudslide, destroyed the crop and killed people. People talk about hurricanes destroying the bananas in the Caribbean. And actually, that's when I first began to realise that we have to tackle climate change along with ensuring farmers and workers get a fair deal. And that they're two sides of the same coin, aren't they? Because for too long, people have paid farmers and workers too little, and have also not paid what it costs to take out of nature and out of the planet. So all those costs were pushed away in the ruthless drive for profit. And what we've got to do is make sure they're put back in, that companies are ready to pay for what it takes to care for the planet and to farm in a much more sustainable way. And I do think we're seeing that shift among companies. And that's going to be absolutely critical, not only in helping them change their supply chains and enabling you and me as consumers to buy products we want that are grown and produced sustainably, but also in helping push governments to make the big, bold changes that they need to make at the big climate change talks and the big trade deals, to make sure that we do put sustainability, both of the environment and of caring for people, right at the heart of business models.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And that's exactly what I think the Ashden Awards is doing as well, by highlighting the companies that are doing that. And so for people who are interested in actually going to the virtual award ceremony and taking part and learning more about the companies that that have made it as finalists and previous award winners, where can people sign up and learn more about Ashden? and the awards.
Yeah, please come to our website at, as I mentioned, it's www.ashden, which is ASHDEN.org. You'll find there about the ceremony. It's free to register. It's only going to last about 35 minutes, but I can guarantee you it will be a shot of inspiration and hope, because these are the pioneers creating the living alternatives around the world, showing what's possible to put sustainability at the heart of your business models. So I can guarantee you'll come away inspired.
Excellent. And I think that's exactly what we want. Is there's enough doom and gloom in the media about the environment, so a nice shot of inspiration is lovely, especially for 35 minutes of your time. It sounds fantastic. And again, it's on Thursday, July 2nd. And what time is it start?
It's at 3:00 UK time. We thought that was the best time to try to enable people all around the world to join us. Please also look at our Twitter feed. We're putting out the links where you can just press through and register there, or on LinkedIn and Facebook. So yeah, please come and join us.
Excellent. Well, I'm certainly looking forward to it. So Harriet, thank you so much for your time. Really interesting conversation. I love the work that you're doing, you have been doing. And I think Ashden is I can certainly relate. And we're clearly on the same page here about highlighting amazing people and companies that are protecting and healing the planet. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, give us a 5-star rating. And also, please subscribe, whether on your podcast app or on YouTube. And that way you can be the first to know about new episodes. Thank you very much, and talk to you soon.